everyone, and want to welcome everyone to our conversation with Rob Fitzpatrick. Rob's joining us from Barcelona. Many know Rob through his book, The Mom Test, which often gets shared at the Bootstrappers Breakfast as a way to sort of vet your idea for those who are trying to figure out what am I working on and how can I explain and simplify my idea. Rob's been working on a lot of other interesting stuff since then, including some research on how entrepreneurs do select their ideas, but also as entrepreneurs grow their businesses and grow their careers as entrepreneurs, how do you build up assets and create safety nets as you contemplate your career path as an entrepreneur, your second business, your third business, and so on. And so Rob is here to share some of his thoughts about that. And I'm going to let Rob share his screen since I can't trigger it for him. But Rob will introduce himself through his screen share. Rob, good morning.
Hello, everybody.
And can everyone see Rob? All right, super. All right, I'm going to shut up and let Rob talk. Welcome, Rob.
Hey, thank you for having me, and good morning, everybody. If you see me drinking a beer, I'm in Barcelona. It is my afternoon, so don't get too mad. I wrote the Mom Test book about talking to customers, but today I wanted to talk about kind of like the bootstrapping career path based on what happened to me after my first company went out of business. So we'd been trying to build a scalable startup. We'd gotten funding from Y Combinator and then some other good investors. We worked really hard for like 4 years. We were basically trying to figure out social advertising before Twitter or Facebook could manage to do so, which obviously didn't work out super well for us. But what was really frustrating to me was that we'd kind of chosen the business not because we necessarily cared about advertising, but because it was something where it looked real good on paper. If you put it on a spreadsheet, the market was huge. The bottom right corner looked amazing. Investors were excited, like big investors were taking us seriously. And it meant that while that was fun while we were building it, once it failed and we had to shut it down, it was doubly frustrating. First, because going out of business always sucks a bit. You know, it's financially painful and emotionally painful. But also, I realized that all of that time, those 4 years, like there was nothing I could take with me to my next business. You know, maybe my skills, but you know, that's weak consolation. Because I'd worked so hard to get taken seriously by this industry. Like we had customers like MTV and Sony, and suddenly I was like, I never want to work for these people again. Like I don't want to serve this industry. You know, I don't want to help big media make more advertising money. And so I was going to switch. So all of these contacts that had taken me years to get them to take me seriously, I suddenly realized I just needed to throw them all away. And it had taken me so much time to figure out the industry with a level of like sophistication and understanding. And again, just wasted, completely thrown away. And so I sort of decided that I didn't want a career strategy, which only worked if my businesses succeeded. I wanted a career strategy for entrepreneurship where it would work through both ups and downs. And even if a company failed, I would still be able to take resources and assets from that company with me into my next one. And also that I would be protected. So this switched my goal from not a single all or nothing company, but a successful career. And this really changed the way I allocated my time and my priorities. The kind of sub goals is I wanted to make sure that I never had to get a job, which is what I called a blow up from, you know, borrowing Nassim Taleb's term. I didn't want to be in a position where I dug myself into such a big hole that like I needed to, that I wasn't able to start my next company. And then I wanted each company to be easier than the previous one. So, you know, the second should be easier than the first. The third should be easier than the second. And are the words on my screen coming through? Someone just give me, okay, cool. So I wanted to talk about kind of the way I changed my time allocation and also like, you know, particularly what you can do and what these assets are. The obvious one, which I'm not going to talk about, is money, because, you know, you kind of have it or you don't. And whatever, over time during your career, you tend to end up with more. You tend to not have very much when you start out. And it does help. Like, obviously, if you have more money to work with, that's a big advantage. It takes a lot of pressure off. But the other ones that I think are more interesting can be controlled immediately and are maybe a little bit more subtle. There's three of them that I want to talk about. The first one's industry insight and connectedness. This is all the stuff that you get from your customer discovery. So if you're starting a business in a new industry, the first 6 months or 12 months are basically just getting to know the industry and the people. What do the customers really care about? What are they already doing and why? Will these people take me seriously enough to accept a meeting with me? Do I understand how the budgets work, how it all fits together, the legal implications? That's a big time cost. And I mean, my first company, we probably spent the better part of 2 years just working on this, and we were trying to do other stuff, but it was really slowing us down. And that's like a huge penalty. That's like having to go back to university every time you switch jobs. It's like a huge penalty to have to redo this work with every project. The second one you can carry with you is access to strong collaborators, which includes both individual co-founders and also other organizations who you can partner up with. And this might be for a company, but it might also just be for a gig. And what I've noticed about co-founders that I think everyone understands, but the actions don't really match that understanding, is that the people you would want as co-founders are typically busy. And so if you start your company and then look for co-founders, or if you have an idea and then look for co-founders, you tend to spend a lot of time sitting on your hands, not really being able to be productive. And then some of my friends that have gotten frustrated, they're like, oh, I'll just do it myself, or I'll just hire an agency to do it. And that tends not to go very well, but also waiting is frustrating. And you wouldn't sort of be like, like it's time to get married. Now I just need to find the person. Like, because instead you date people over your whole life so that when you are ready to get married, like you've got that person already lined up. That's kind of a cynical way to say it, but the same holds true with co-founders. I think you need to build those relationships in advance. And if you do, and if you have many to choose from, then it means that when you need a certain type of person, hopefully one person out of your pool is available. A lot of people treat this passively. So they get access to lots of co-founders, like while they're working at Amazon or while they're in university. And then after that, their supply dwindles. And I think that really shuts down your options when you want your options to be growing over time. And the last one is pretty obvious also, but a pre-built audience who already like trusts you, likes you, wants to buy your stuff, or a network of people who like you, believe in you, like working with you. And I think this one also requires some caveats, because I've seen a lot of people, like I'm a programmer and I used to be so cynical about the idea of the network and the value of the network. And I thought that what it meant incorrectly was, your drinking buddies like you, and so they give you free work. And that's not what it is at all. It's the combination of two things. It's people knowing you, but also knowing and believing that you can do a certain kind of work or deliver a certain kind of result, which means just knowing people isn't enough, and just doing good work isn't enough. You need both, and obviously that carries a time cost as well. And the reason I think these things are interesting, and also I should probably say this is kind of, everything I'm talking about here is slightly frustrating advice, because it's not necessarily going to help your current company. But what I do believe, and what I found for myself, is it will definitely help your next company if you start investing in it now. And it builds up these unfair advantages and these resources. Like I always remember when Jason Cohen, who blogs at A Smart Bear, when he was starting WP Engine, which is premium WordPress hosting, he sort of said, okay, I've had one successful company, but I'm gonna talk you through, I'm gonna post everything. I'm gonna reveal the entire case study of me building this business from, initial customer discussions through, wherever. And he had to stop posting after a few weeks because he was already past 1 million in revenue. And he thought that, maybe I shouldn't be sharing all these numbers. And what fascinated me was in the comments, there were people complaining, and they were saying, well, look, it's really easy for you to start a successful business because you've already got a 20,000 person mailing list of your customers. And he said, yeah, of course. And that's why, like, I've been saying that you should blog for the last 10 years. Because these resources are never time efficient to build them when you need them. Co-founders, insight, an audience, like that's stuff that you start investing in years before you need it, on the belief that it'll pay off for you later. It's like planting a tree. If you want to beautify your house in a hurry, it's like planting a tree is no good. But like if you do it now anyway, like in 10 years, that really helps you out. And what this does is it changes the risk equation of building a business. So one way I think about the risk when I'm looking at a new idea or deciding on a project is how many months until either I've reached break even, so I'm not losing money, or I know enough to know it's a bad idea and I give myself permission to quit. Because you don't want to quit something when you still think it might have legs. So I'm like, okay, how many months until like I have a shot at being break even or quitting? And you can kind of tell. Like an agency, you're going to be break even or quit within 2 or 3 months. Whereas like with a social network, it might take 2 or 3 years. So you can tell, like, this isn't an exact prediction, but you can tell like an order of magnitude or a rough measure by the type of idea. Then your burn rate, which is personal and depends on the team and stuff. And then the uncertainty, which I think of like typically consumer apps carry a lot more uncertainty. Whereas enterprise apps or selling to a business is easier to validate in advance, so you can be a bit more precise. But all of this turns into the risk equation. And what Lean Startup did is they kind of were just really optimizing around the time factor, the speed factor. They said like, okay, you have an idea, let's take that for granted. You have a team, let's take that for granted. How do we like, go faster to figure out if this is going to work or not? How can we reduce the months? And that's certainly useful. That's a tool you want in your toolkit, but I think it's only half the battle because if you are building these assets, it fundamentally changes it as well. Like if you can go into a new company and you already understand the industry and you already have the connections, you've just saved a year. If you're like a 10 grand a month runway when you're kind of starting up and in the bootstrap phase, that's worth 120 grand of investment. It's zero equity dilution. That's a really, really good deal. It's hard to find a deal like that in early stage startups. And so it becomes a real competitive advantage if you've built this. If you already have the mailing list like Jason Cohen did, that's like $1 million advantage. That's enormous. It's indescribable. The best co-founder, like all of this stuff really adds up. And what it does is it saves you these months. It reduces the uncertainty. And if you combine this with good strategy, which is what Lean does and all the other approaches, and if you combine it with careful idea selection, I found for me when I started thinking about it this way, it just stopped feeling risky. It's like, oh, I know what I'm going into. Like it may not work, but like it felt like a career path where each step, like each job I took, each company I built, well, I mean, I wasn't taking jobs, but each company I built or each product I made felt like a step forward on this career that I was trying to get started. And so in terms of practical actions, there's 3 I would suggest. And I think there's a bunch of others you could do. I'm not saying these are the only way to build these resources or they're the only ones that exist. But the one that's been most life-changing for me, and it's kind of stupid in its simplicity, is pick customers you like. Like this was the root cause failure of my first business, was that we didn't like our customers. And what that does is it, like while you're building the business, it's harder. You don't want to do customer discovery with customers you don't like or don't respect or don't actually care about. It's harder to meet them. You don't already have the shared language because you don't have the shared life experience and understanding and empathy. Like it gives you probably like a 2 to 10x disadvantage on your customer discovery. And then what really got me was that then I didn't want to reuse those connections in my next business because I was sick of them. And I think that like no one would go back to university every time they switch jobs, but I see people all the time in entrepreneurship where they completely switch industries every project because they're jumping to the next hot thing or to whatever looks best on the spreadsheet. Another one is co-founder dating via side projects. What I like to do is I allocate 5 to 10% of my time to basically just do unpaid side projects with people who I would think might make good potential co-founders. And the reason for this is that you can evaluate people's skills remotely. You can look at their GitHub profile, their work experience. You can get a pretty good sense of people's skills, but it's really hard to figure out their worldviews and their priorities, like their decision-making process, their values. I found until you work together with someone, but once you do start working, you can get that in a weekend. It's really, really fast once you're actually sitting beside each other trying to launch something. And so I'd spend a weekend a month or something like that. And whenever I meet a smart person, I go home and I think like, okay, what's a plausible side project I could come up with that this person might be willing to spend a couple days working on with me on? And that's a chance just to plant the seed of that relationship so that 5 years later, when one or other of us sees an opportunity, like that work's already been done. We already know if we're going to work together well or not. And it's slow. Over a dozen years, I found maybe a dozen people who I align with. So it's pretty slow going, but that's enough that now whenever I need someone, I know someone great, which it kind of starts to feel like a superpower. And the last one, also obvious, but a lot of us don't do it, is just make your effort public. Whether that's with a small group of peers or customers through some sort of brain trust or industry lunches or these sorts of things. Side projects work for this as well. Going in, just like helping people out, or whether it's more mass market, like marketing driven with a mailing list, a developer blog, open source, like all the stuff everyone says you should do. This is the equivalent of Jason Cohen's mailing list. You know, he'd made his thought process public, and as a side effect, he'd accumulated this big group of people who already trusted him and liked him. So these things, as I mentioned, they probably don't help your current company, which is why I think that unless you happen to like them, they're very easy to overlook, and it's easy to dismiss their value. This is why I avoided, like, I'm not currently blogging, but like when my career was at the critical point, I was, and I'd put it off for so many years because I looked at the growth rates of building a list and I'm like, there's no way this helps. Like, we're going to be successful or bankrupt by the time this pays off. Why would I even bother? And then after we went out of business and I was starting my next company, I was like, oh, I sure wish I'd done that. So these unfair advantages come from irrational habits. And I think like another like quote, irrational habit is if you go just incredibly over the top with customer support, delighting your customers, giving away revenue, telling them if your competitor's a better fit for them than you are. This sort of over-the-top customer service, it's like a 5% tax, let's say. But it comes back to you in your next company because those customers really trust you. Like after getting sick of the ad industry, I decided I loved education, so I started serving universities. And even though the first product that I built for them, we had like 12 universities using it, a grand total of 500 pounds in revenue or something. It really wasn't successful at all, but we treated them well enough that when we shut that down and started the next one, all it took was a phone call and they were willing to pay us in advance because they're like, oh yeah, you know me, I know you know my problems, I know I can trust your work. And suddenly like it went from like, ooh, startups are hard and risky to like, oh, like I know already that I have customers. And it totally changed the equation. So I guess that's it. There's nothing profound. Like you've probably thought of these resources before. There's nothing mind-blowing here, but I still see a lot of people, they either jump around too much or they talk themselves out of doing it because they're too focused on the short term and they don't want to pay the time tax, or they're like, oh, I'll find the co-founder when I need them. And I would just encourage you, like, if you stop thinking of a company as the one shot, and already most of you are on your second or beyond company, so I'm sure you're not. But anyway, hopefully that's a useful concept. And yeah, I mean, I think we're going to do some questions and stuff, but I know I've kind of avoided the customer development and mom test stuff, but if you've got questions about that or this or anything else, certainly happy to chat through it. So yeah, thanks a lot. And yeah, wish you guys the best.
Okay. Rob, thank you. Really appreciate that. Some great insights. And I think as I had shared with you when I had heard your presentation in Palo Alto, I kind of walked away with the feeling of, oh man, I didn't do any of that. No wonder why startup number 8 was just as hard as startup number 1. Wish I had met you 30 years ago. You might have been younger though. Anyhow, you know, what I'll ask for is show of hands, you know, take yourself off mute. And take yourself off mute and ask your question or put your question into the chat and we'll ask it for Rob on your behalf. So I am sure there are questions, and I will certainly call on people if you don't volunteer because we want participation. Hey, Tim, I think you guys can mute your, I don't think I have the room locked down, so I think you can unmute yourself if you want. So if you raise a virtual, just so that we don't talk over one another.
So we got a question from Rob Yu. How do you optimize for making these industry connections and making the right choice and choosing the right industry? I don't have like, so I know that like the VC answer is, you know, about like market size and market trends and a rising tide lifts all boats and stuff. But for me, that's not what keeps me going and keeps me motivated. For me, what I get excited by is customers who I really care about helping and admire. So like I admire and like educators. Like I like hanging out with university professors. I like talking to them about their lives and their research. So for me, that's like a very appealing quality. And now I'm serving my business now. I kind of switched from education. I did it for 8 years. It worked okay, had like pretty good companies in it. Now I switched to people who want to write books or be authors. And again, it's just like, those are people I admire and like hanging out with. So I'm like, okay, that's easy. And then that's the positive pull. But then I would eliminate industries that I think are either just have like terrible industry trends or that there's just, it's like impossible to get money in from. So for me, it's like, I might be the reverse, whereas if you start with the spreadsheet, you go like, is it a good market? And then what puts you off it is, do I hate it? Whereas like I start with, do I love it? And then what puts me off it is if it has like truly terrible industry dynamics. But like you don't need that great of an industry to succeed as a bootstrapper. Like it like doesn't take a very big industry to be doing $1 million a year or whatever. So that's my opinion on that. But I know it's probably suboptimal, but I found like I have to optimize for my own excitement, because otherwise I'm just not going to keep going. And then I'm not going to get through the hard parts and I'm not going to accrue these long-term benefits. So I just accepted that like I need to be excited, and that's what I do. In terms of making the individual connections, this comes a little bit to like the superpower of the entrepreneur, which is that people want to help you because you're trying to help them. And if you actually care about their work, their lives, solving their problems, giving them something that brings them joy, whatever, people see that. And the superpower of the entrepreneur is they help you even when there's no reason to do so. They want to support you. They want to believe in you. You're doing something exciting. That, of course, means you need to be telling people what you're doing. If you spend 2 years coding in private, that doesn't help build any of those things. But if you do some part of your work in public, it comes naturally. And what I realized through when I was learning sales, because I'm a programmer by background and I had to learn customer development and sales afterwards. What I learned is you can't close every sale and you can't win every conversation. So I stopped beating myself up about the ones that were doomed. And what I did is I started spending all my time on the conversations that were easy and with a person who did enjoy talking to me. So like if someone didn't want to talk to me, like early on, I was like, I have to make them like me. And then eventually I realized, well, like that's suboptimal. And so what I did instead is like, of the 10 people, I'm looking for the 5 who already like me, for whatever magical reason. And then it's like, oh, great, I'll just spend my time with them. And I won't worry about the people who are busy and grumpy. And I found that all of my connections, they didn't grow out of anything clever. They just grew out of like finding the customers I got along with and then like doing everything I could to help them out.
Great, thank you, Rob. Other questions?
Yes. Hello, Rob. Shadidi Laser. I'm from Bootstrappers Breakfast, Baltimore. I'm curious to know about your the 5 to 10% that you apply to, let's say, joint projects or projects where you work with others. The way that I use this approach is more of a give back campaign, where if someone is looking to get into an industry and I help them, I create a project to help them. But in this case, it seems that it's peers. My thought when you mention that is to have like a set time duration, let's say a 90-day sprint or 6 months. What are your thoughts on having a fixed duration for a co-project?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you'll drown yourself if you're trying to create like permanent side projects with a bunch of different people. Like you'll quickly fritter away all your attention, and then you won't be able to do what you need to with your main project. So yeah, I agree. When I do them, I mean, I would personally, I do even shorter duration. I'm like, let's spend 3 days on this, or let's spend a weekend on this, and it's just a chance for us to build something together. And we may decide to continue it. And I've actually had a couple businesses, a business I ran for 3 years called Founder Centric, which was an education agency. And we ended up getting up to like bootstrapped to $1 million a year and had a good little business. But that came out of a weekend side project because I'd met a smart dude named Salim. And he had organized a conference I went to. And when I went to the conference, he was the organizer. I didn't know him at all. I had zero connections to him, but he kind of introduced the conference. He introduced the speakers. He told me what he told the crowd, you know, there were hundreds of people there, what he was trying to do. And in my head, I was like, that's someone I might want to work with someday. So what I did is when the conference ended, I just didn't leave. And I'm like, hey, can I help the crew put away chairs? And I just helped him pack away the conference. And so, you know, we got chatting. I did like 8 hours work, just like moving chairs and like mopping floors and stuff. We were chatting and I was like, hey, like, can I help? Like, can we do something together? So we're like, yeah. So that project was just a little meetup. And we're like, oh yeah, let's organize an event together, get some smart people, like share their thoughts. It's like, boom, that was enough. And we're like, oh, we work really well together. In other cases, it's been tech, it's been remote. It's like, oh, let's launch a website. There's a dude now in Barcelona named Mark, and he was super smart. A buddy of mine, I already knew him socially, but I'd never worked with him. But in my head, it's like, he's an ex-lawyer who taught himself to program because he grew disillusioned with law. He quickly rose to be an engineering manager at a Barcelona startup. He's like super sharp. I'm like, that's someone I could work with. And so during lockdown, everyone's working from home. He's a bit bored. It's like, oh, great. Like, you know, what can we do together? And so we came up with a little tech project. It gets half of his day per week. Like I give it the same amount of time, and it's just like, you know, but now it's going pretty well. We're going to start charging for it soon. So it's like, but I've also had a lot where we work together for a day and we go, wow, thank goodness we learned that before we started a company together. We are a disaster together. And that's also an important thing to learn. There's less, like you wouldn't marry someone before you dated them. So that's the way I approach it.
Thanks for that insight. I just realized in your answer that Bootstrappers Breakfast Baltimore, my co-founder or co-host, Henry Mortimer, I always say it's my excuse. Doing the breakfast is my excuse to be able to interface with Henry because he's so talented. So that's great insight. Thank you.
Cool. So a question from Carolyn, educator and author, wrote a children's book that sold over 100,000 copies. Congratulations. That's an incredible milestone. Is there a way to get lists of the people who have bought the book? Unfortunately, no. As far as I know, Amazon keeps the customer relationships really close to their chest. So Amazon's an incredible partner in so many ways. Pretty good royalty rights, pretty transparent, pretty good analytics and aggregate. The print on demand's amazing. Like they have so many perks, but they want to control the customer relationship completely. So like I've sold some Mom Test, I think it's sold like 50 or 60,000 copies. Of those, 5,000 have been directly through my blog, so like 10,000. So those people I have access to. But still, it's been like, even with that, like I think there's sometimes I see founders like err too far toward, like people sign up for their service and then they start emailing everyone, trying to ask them to fill out surveys and do this and that. And I think that's a bit of a violation of the expectations of when they bought it. So I think it needs to be, it's amazing if you can create like a sub audience, which you do have direct access to because you can learn from them and they're representative, hopefully, of your broader customer segment. Like you never need to talk to 100% of your customers. If you can talk to 5% of your customers or 1%, that's enough. So sometimes if you can get those people, and I try to do this now through the blog sales, try to make it like a bit more direct. Sometimes I'll send them an email like, hey, thanks for buying. If you have any questions, let me know. I try to give in the first contact rather than get. And then again, only a subset of that subset will come back to me with a question. But once they do, there's been an exchange of value. I've been able to give instead of ask. And then it's a lot easier to transition into the conversation. And often, yeah, so that would, I wish Amazon would give better customer lists and demographics. That would be a dream, but I can understand they want to keep their monopoly.
And some are sharing in the chat room, a few ideas about how maybe authors can reach their audiences. And Rob, as you contemplate, potentially future books or future written projects, are there things that you would do differently this time?
I got a lot of benefit by just putting my Twitter name all over the book because I found that people are pretty comfortable like shooting me a tweet, and I get a lot more tweets than emails, even though like I'm not able to help in that way. And I just like often those will someone will ask a question and then I'll answer, and like sometimes that then moves into DMs or like a private email thread, and that's where like what I'm most interested. It's a different style of book, obviously, than a children's book, but and this is true for every product, so maybe it's a generally useful comment. I don't really care what people tell me that they liked or didn't like. I kind of ignore that. What I care is about watching what they did or didn't do, or could or couldn't do. So I'm trying to look at their behaviors and problems rather than listen to their words. So what I love when I'm getting like feedback on a book, software, anything, is I'm less interested whenever someone says, oh, it's great, it's amazing. It's like, or I hate it, it's terrible. I mean, I like it, fine, like compliments are nice, but like I don't make product decisions based on that. But what I do make product decisions based on is where someone's like, I get a lot of questions about whatever, like how to write a cold email. So I'm like, oh, okay, that's obviously because people were asking this question, that's obviously something I failed, my product, my book failed to solve that problem for its users. So because they've had the question, that's showing me a weakness in my product, and then that's actions, not words. So that's something that I would definitely try to improve in a future version. But no, Amazon's just too powerful. Sometimes you take the compromises with a partner, and Amazon offers so much incredible stuff that it's like, I'm happy for them to keep the, I don't know, it's just trade-offs. You know, you're not going to get everything you want from a partner.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Carolyn, for the question. There's another question, I think, I don't know that if it got answered in your last answer regarding the transitions from Adrian, about the transition from, side project to, co-founding a company.
So there's different stages of partnership, right? So you can have a trust-based partnership, a contractual partnership, and then an equity partnership. And people always rush straight into equity, but that's crazy because equity is the only one you can't easily undo. What I would typically do is start with trust up until there's a point where there's an asset that I would feel bad if it got taken away from me. So that could be as simple as a domain name, or it could be like code, or it could be something we wrote together, or like whatever, a brand. So like you can trust up until there's the beginnings of an asset. And as soon as there's an asset, you need like at least some sort of, it doesn't need to be a fancy legal contract, but even like writing it down as a gentleman's agreement, and begins to formalize like, hey, like if we go our separate ways or one of us stops working on it, this is what happens to the asset we built so far. And I personally don't like to get equity involved until absolutely required. Which is either there's so much revenue flowing through the company that it seems irresponsible not to have equity, or if we need like external investors or something like that. But I mean, I'm pretty committed to bootstrapping, so that's not a factor. Like, for example, my business partner of the last 4 years, we don't split equity. What we do is we both have separate companies, and we have a profit sharing contract. So we both give each other 50% of the profit from our respective companies, which means that we're free to work on each other's projects in as much as our own, because we both get the upside from each other's projects. So just by putting that contract in place, suddenly both of our companies felt like both of our companies instead of feeling like separate entities. And right now, his name's Devin. Right now, Devin's working more on what's technically my projects, but it doesn't really matter because he gets half the profits. So it works as if we had 50-50, but without the like one-way legal overhead. So I like to ease in with those contracts, and it's like marriage. You don't need to marry someone just because you like them. That's a contractual arrangement. And like you go into it when you're ready to like split the assets, and you want all the extra overhead and protections that that affords. Yeah, that's where I'm at. It might be a little bit different if it was something which was going to have multi-year research and development, where you need to commit far in advance, and you're worried that your contributions are going to be. Yeah, it's going to be situational, but I would say delay the equity. Like all the time, people email me. Their first email to me, and they go, "Rob, can you be an advisor? We want to give you 1%." It's like, whoa, we've literally never talked. Like, I don't know you. You don't know me. Like, why would you want to get into an equity relationship? And I always say, like, just send me questions. I'll help you if you can. Like, we can get on calls, whatever. I'll help you. But like, let's date before we put structure on this. I think maybe there's a temptation, like swapping equity. It feels a bit like we're doing business, like in air quotes, but actually it's just paperwork. Like doing business is creating value for customers. So like take like the minimum legal overhead, which protects you, and then just focus on creating value for customers. Also, in most jurisdictions, it's way easier to start a company than it is to shut down a company. Shutting down a company is just an accounting nightmare. It's like paperwork for weeks. So, you don't want to be there was one night where I got drunk with this dude at a bar and we were having so much fun. I woke up the next morning with an incorporation. Like, you know, it's like we'd started a company at the pub because we were so drunk and excited that I was like, oh, like, yeah, now I have to undo all this. What a pain.
There's no such thing as like a Vegas annulment or anything.
Yeah.
Great. We have losing some track of some of the questions here. So I'm behind a little bit.
There's a question from Marcus about which 3 to 5 business or leadership books do I think really help for bootstrappers. I'm going to try to give the slightly non-obvious suggestions maybe. For me, like the biggest mind blower was Black Swan by Nassim Taleb, because that, like, if you've read it, you will have heard threads of it in the little talk I just gave, because Taleb's point is like, a lot of bankers are like people with they're playing Russian roulette, where it goes well for a while and then it goes extremely badly and all of their gains are wiped out. And so that really made me feel like, before I'd read that and when I was in my first company, all I cared about was maximizing upside. And after reading that, and what I realized is essential if you want a stable, non-risky bootstrapping career, is you've got to pay just as much attention to minimizing your downside and protecting yourself in those cases. And sometimes that means, for example, like, if someone put a gun to your head and said, if this company fails, I'm going to shoot you, then of course you're going to take crazy gambles, right? You're going to do insane things because there's no getting away from it. And I think that's like the mental situation people are in when they overinvest and they go into a ton of personal debt. This is what I did with my first company. I got ruined. It was such like, it was very burdensome. And it was because I was like, this company has to succeed. It's all I'm ever going to have. And after Black Swan, I was sort of like, oh no, I need to manage my downside so that there can be a next company. So that's one. Felix Dennis's How to Get Rich is pretty hilarious and also surprisingly useful despite the weird title. It's like the only business / poetry book I've read. And he's just such an unabashed, like greedy capitalist. It's quite interesting and also very smart and self-aware. It's interesting both as a cautionary tale, which helped me kick like my addiction to being so ambitious and be like, actually, I want to protect my family and make a good life for myself. So it works for me as a cautionary tale, and it also works being full of really good business advice. So I enjoyed that one a lot. And another one that I might say, I don't know. Those are two. Hard Things About Hard Things is great. Oh, no, but one that you probably haven't read is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, which is about negotiation. He was the former head FBI hostage negotiator. And it's insane. Honestly, like there's relatively few books which I would have paid $10,000 for in retrospect. And that's certainly one of them, where I was just like, man, if I had read this book slightly earlier in my career, like that would have been $1 million upside to my career. It's like, it's crazy. I never thought, I'm not a negotiator. I never thought it would be important, but it totally changed the way I dealt with every sales and partnership conversation I had from then on, including like co-founders. My girlfriend read it too. It changed our relationship. I don't know. It's like, it's super good book. So yeah, Never Split the Difference, Black Swan, and How to Get Rich would be my 3.
Thanks, Rob. That's exactly what I was looking for. So thanks.
And actually, the Never Split the Difference came up at, I think, a Philly Bootstrappers Breakfast a number of weeks ago. Some recommendations and discussion around negotiating in that book. So there's a...
it's so good. Everyone should read it. It's also just such a pleasure because, like, you know, as the hostage negotiator, he has such amazing stories, but he doesn't get bogged down in the stories. It's a perfect balance of like fascinating stories and actionable knowledge.
Super. Thank you, Rob. Question. We got a few good questions in here. I'm just going to kind of pick them in a random order. Sravats, as an introvert, I much prefer talking to customers via email than getting on a call, overcoming the resistance to, you know, in customer discovery to really have better conversations.
Yeah, so I guess I'm now at the stage where I'd call myself a confident introvert, whereas I used to be like a non-confident introvert. And so I certainly don't enjoy talking to strangers. But what I found was that there's easy conversations and hard conversations. And the big thing that changed for me, like when I was starting out, I was trying to force myself through the hard conversations. So I was trying to talk to that executive at the big media company who really didn't want to talk to me. And by the time I finally like convinced him to give me the meeting, he's already mad at me. And it's like the conversation starts out on the back foot and they're defensive and they're rushed. It's like, that's a really hard environment to learn in because their shields are up, they're trying to get it done. And I realized that there was a strong correlation between the easiness of the conversation or like the pleasure of the conversation or how much we actually wanted to be talking to each other and how much I was able to learn. And so eventually I'm like, well, why am I having these hard conversations? They're like emotionally painful, they're difficult to set up, and I'm not learning from them. So I'm like, okay, once I know my company's working and I'm a product market fit, I'm going to hire like a mercenary sales hustler and he'll go deal with those hard conversations. But for me, as like the founder or the entrepreneur, like I'm going to take the easy conversations because what you learn from those customers still generalizes to the others in most cases. And it's so much faster. It's so much more pleasant. And I think a big part of it, especially if you're introverted, and it really affects your energy levels to go into emotionally draining conversations. And for me, at least, if I've had a couple of those, like I'm unproductive for the rest of the week because it's just so emotionally traumatic. So I can't allow myself to go to into these situations where like it undermines the rest of my ability to work. So I'm like, oh, I'll just talk to the people who are excited to talk to me. And I take kind of the same attitude with most of the early stage decisions. Like early stage, I'm not convincing anyone to buy my stuff. I'm giving them an opportunity to show me they care by giving me money. Like, and mentally, it's a really different thing because I'm not trying to convince them. I'm not trying to trick them. I'm not trying to talk them into it. Just like, hey, by the way, like, this is what it is. And if you want it, you can, it's like, it's still in beta, but you can have early access if you want to pay. And a lot of people, if you frame it in that way, a lot of people go, oh, no, it's not for me. But like, I'd love to check out a demo when it's publicly available. And you go, cool, I'll loop back to you. They're not my first customer, though. Whereas the people who are like, yeah, this is amazing. I can't wait. How much is it? Like, let me get in there. It's like, all right, they're legitimately excited. And you're not like, you don't feel like you're pulling money out of them. You feel like you're actually helping them. And that's a total flip in my head, which made those interactions go from a pain into a pleasure. So I would say like play the metagame when it comes to the introversion and the nervousness and try to find ways to make the whole situation easier on yourself and less demanding. In terms of email, you can learn some stuff from email, but it's really not as good. It depends a bit how much like analytics and volume you have. Like sometimes you know where the problems are, but if you hit a real mystery, you're like, I'm not sure why they're not using it. Like it's hard to answer that question through email. So, but then choose the friendliest, easiest, most accessible customer and try to get them on a call. Start there.
Thanks, Rob. And if I can add the coach's perspectives to that, a lot of coaches like we do will tell you that, you're never growing until you're out of your comfort zone. And I will say that probably 60% of the people in the room here today, if not more, are introverts. Rob says he's an introvert. I'm certainly an introvert. Introverts tend to, entrepreneurs tend to be more introverted than extroverted, in part because perhaps we don't do well working for others. But the fact is that what you're struggling with is pretty common for us. But your business isn't going to grow, and you as an entrepreneur and ultimately you as a leader are not going to grow until we push ourselves out of, the areas in which we're comfortable. And one of the side effects of this global pandemic and economic crisis is we've all been forced out of our comfort zone somewhat, and that's that's a good thing. That's a good thing. We're trying things that we haven't had to do before. I'm getting a lot of clients right now tell me, hey, our pipelines are drying up. We milk, the first few months of this stay-at-home order were great because we milked our pipeline and we kind of converted customers. But now I've got no pipeline left because I haven't been out there selling. And how do I sell in this new world? And they're now forcing themselves out of their comfort zone to have these conversations about selling in the midst of the pandemic. And I think, Chuck, you were with me when we were running an incubator, and one of the assignments from a sales coach doing some mentoring at the incubator was for all of the participants to do 100 cold calls that day, which is, calling 100 random people and asking them to buy your product was it's an exercise in accepting rejection.
Or torture.
Excuse me, Chuck?
Or torture.
Yeah, torture. Well, as the ones running the incubator, it was certainly, there was certainly a little something a bit sadistic about it. We have a few more questions here. Now, so Tim asked a question about selling to universities, and if I'm not mistaken, did that come up in the Palo Alto Bootstrappers Breakfast as well when you were there? For some reason, I remember recently having this conversation.
Yeah, I think it might have. So yeah, university. What's the full question, or is that the question?
Let me pull it. Can you explain the sales process with
Yeah.
universities?
Yeah, I was just
Oh, yeah.
curious how that works relative to like enterprises or consumers or whatever.
Yeah, so universities are basically a combination of selling to enterprises and selling to governments, except they don't have budget. So it's kind of an uphill battle, and they're very complex. And it's one of these situations, like this is true of any big enterprise sale. Like once there's multiple stakeholders and you're going to have to go through legal and procurement and possibly even a public tender process, where they kind of state what they need and you send in a proposal and go through a review board, all this stuff to make sure they're not insider dealing. It's really hard to get through that process unless you have an internal evangelist inside of the organization. And this is true with universities. Governments aren't really meant to do it, but it happens sometimes, but certainly with enterprises as well. And so I'd first say, like, when I'm looking for, like, it's what Steve Blank called the early evangelists. I'm basically looking for someone who's so excited about the project that they're willing to put their reputation on the line and they're willing to do work when I'm not in the room with them. That's like the number one thing. And usually they're excited. Usually it feels like you're not convincing them. It feels like they're on your team, helping you to understand the rest of the organization. They're like, oh yeah, these are the budgets and this is the process and this person's going to hate it, but we can convince them like this. It really feels like they're on your side of the table, and that's your internal evangelist. And later on, once you're like a bit more mature, you can do without them because you kind of know the process and you can make pretty reasonable assumptions. But when you're starting out, you really need them in your first few sales, and they'll guide you through. And a big part of universities in particular is playing the budget game. Because what happens is budgets get pre-allocated to different departments and purposes, and they can't create new budgets on demand most of the time. So it's less like, I once made the case, this was the worst pitch ever because I just didn't understand what universities cared about, but I made the pitch that my software would save them a team of 4. I was like, yeah, you won't need this team. You can get rid of those 4 people, dead stony silence. Because they're like, we're a public organization. Like we can't fire people and their salaries have already been approved. And I'm like, but it would save you $500,000 a year. And they're like, yeah, but that's just not the way they think. So you've really got to understand that their budgets don't always make sense from like an economic perspective, but that's the world you're playing into. So it's kind of a crash course in.
How did you go about prospecting them? Did you shoot emails or just walk in there and talk to the professors?
Gosh, no, it was normal thing. So I started, so someone else, I can combine 2 questions here. So someone else, Brian asked about like, this conversation is focused a lot on like audience, partners, like external stuff. What about product? And this was an example where they blended. So when I was starting the first one that was targeted at universities, this is how the whole chain went. So I'd been working in public. I'd been like blogging and doing like posting postmortems of all my dumb little projects. Someone reached out to me who was getting his PhD at University College London, a fellow named Tom. He's now over in San Francisco. He sold his company to Salesforce. But this was the first company. Anyway, so he reaches out. He goes, oh, I want to talk about the research. And I'm like, oh, I looked into his research, seemed like a smart guy. I'm like, what can we do together? So I went in, we met at the university. I met some of his professors. I helped Tom out on his project. And we kind of got started. At the time, this was my first product or company serving universities. So I didn't know any of them. I didn't have the connections. I didn't have the insight. But what Tom brought was, since he was getting his PhD, he did have all the connections. He was already inside the university system. So the way co-founders work and why they're important is because they can fill in the assets and resources that you don't have yourself. The one we always think of is skills, but actually it can also be insight and connectedness and so much more. And so Tom brought the connectedness to the customer, and I brought the programming, and he brought some other stuff. And so it meant that like the university he was getting his PhD at became our first customer. we found the early evangelists, blah, blah, blah. And then it spread from there to other universities because, you know, universities, they meet up, they have events, and we just worked our way through, we basically followed our early evangelist inside UCL through his network to other department heads at other universities. And we just spread through his personal network. And as I said, that product failed. We had to shut it down when we only had like 500 pounds in revenue. After 2 years, it was pretty terrible. But it meant that for the next project for universities, I already had that network in place. So then it was really quick. And so in terms of the balance between product and this outward facing stuff, like obviously you need both. If all you do is build, like no one knows about it, that's kind of useless unless you get really lucky. If all you do is talk, then eventually like reality catches up with you. Like I don't have my own view on this in terms of like a metric, but like Paul Graham says, you know, the only two things you should be doing before you've launched is talking to customers and writing code. And like, I'm not sure what the exact ratio is, but I agree with the sentiment. It's like, you know, both matter.
Cool. Thanks.
Super, thanks. And Brian, does that, I know we were answering Brian's question within Tim's question. Brian, I see you're here is that,
yeah, no, that was great. That was kind of the mystery, and it's still a mystery, and it's more art than science, and that's kind of what I was learning, wanting to understand.
And something else, I don't actually have it. I wish I could show you an illustration, but I had this little framework for early stage learning strategy. And the idea is there's 6 different types of work that you can do, which bring in learning and progress. So there's like desk research, which MBAs love. There's locking yourself in a room and doing a long technical slog, which like programmers love. And then in between, you've got like talking to customers to learn about them, like discovery, talking to customers to sell stuff and get validated, then building throwaway experiments and building prototypes, so like simplified versions. So you've got like desk research and slogs, and then you've got these more like tactical things that come out of lean startup. And I think something that gets lost in a lot of the case studies, because like people write a blog, like I write a blog post or I give a talk, like it's like you've only got so much space and it gets simplified, is sometimes you've learned all you can and you just need to go into a slog. So you're like, all right, I think it works this way. Now I need to spend 8 months just like building it, or 8 months just grinding the content marketing and building the list. And that's a slog. And when you're in the slogs, you get very little learning. And it's super annoying at that time. Like, if you have someone who's always like, what did you learn this week? And it's like, nothing. Like, I'm in a slog. There's like no learning, you know, I need the technology to work. And so there are stages of the process where it would skew much further toward either build, like it's not always a constant ratio. But I think you need to be quite aware because we all have our comfort zone. Like MBAs and finance people love their desk research. So if they're not sure what to do or they're stressed, they'll always default to that. Technical people, we love our technical slogs. So like if we're stressed or unsure, we always default to that. So there are times when you're going to be like mostly product, but you need to be careful with yourself that you're not using that as an excuse to avoid the more like, you know, awkward or failure prone or emotionally demanding sorts of work.
Slog, we call that in coaching your survival context, but slog is a more colorful word. and right, and how do you push yourself out of that context? There is a question about pricing, all right, about charging, right? How, you know, shifting from you know, getting feedback to getting revenue from Montgomery.
Is for consumers or for enterprises or small businesses? Like what type of customer?
It's for enterprises. We sell B2B to real estate developers and city planners.
Okay, cool. So B2B is nice because like there's so many different ways to anchor, right? So like you can anchor on the value you create for them, the money saved. You can anchor against competitors that they're already used to. You can anchor against like time savings of staff. There's a lot of different credible anchors you can use B2B pricing. And I've never even gotten close to getting it right on my first try. So I typically start with a low ball and then keep doubling it until they start saying no. And you obviously grandfather in the early customers on the lower pricing. There's a ton of literature on this and people have all sorts of models and frameworks and ways of being more precise. Personally, I never found that they worked better for me than just taking a blind guess and then doubling. But, you know, and then this is also a place where industry advisors and early evangelists can be really, really helpful. So one of my buddies, someone I advised, a guy named Alex, I probably shouldn't say his surname because maybe I'm giving away sensitive information here, but he was selling into a big government project, like an infrastructure project. He was making technology for the like construction and infrastructure industry. And he'd sort of chosen a price point based on savings, which was like 100 grand a year, something like that. And he'd been in the sales process for months where they seemed so excited. They were giving so many positive signals and so much positive feedback, but like the sale just couldn't close. And eventually he just went in and he basically given up on the sale. And he hadn't realized that the person he was trying to convince was actually on his side of the table and was an early evangelist and was a full supporter. And so he went in there just despondent. He was basically giving up. And he's like, look, I can see that this sale isn't going to go through. Like, we're running out of money. Our company's going to die. Like, is there anything you can tell me about like what would have made this work? And the dude says, oh yeah, if it's more than 5,000 a month, I need to go to public tender, and then you'll be competing against all the big accounting firms. So I was just trying to like find a way to avoid that. And he's like, oh, what if we just charge you 5,000 a month? And the dude goes, oh, I'll pay that on my credit card right now. You know, I don't have to go through procurement for that. And so he goes, oh, okay, great. So his pricing dropped from 100 or 120,000 to 5,000 per month, which is 60 grand per year. But it meant he had this giant government infrastructure project, and suddenly he was credible with all his other customers. And now it's a brilliant business. And it was a case where he was failing to learn because he was trying to act too polished and professional. And he hadn't realized that this person wasn't a customer he needed to convince. This person was an early evangelist who was on his side of the table. And if he just like opened up and revealed the weakness and asked for help, it's like, boom, he got his answer that day. And so sometimes that can help if you can find either the early evangelist or the industry advisor, and they can just tell you, oh, this is the way it works. This will fit you into this budget. It's done. And that can save months and months of failed pitches and iterations.
That makes sense. Thank you.
And I say that advice is sort of like just find a unicorn. It's like much easier said than done. Like these people are fantastically rare. But there's something I'm always looking for when I'm in a new industry or building a new product. It's like, who's that? You know, they're so precious. Like when you find them, that's when you start really being able to get these early sales through. And then everything else can fall from there because you've got the credibility.
Can you answer that same question, but for consumers?
With pricing? Yeah. I don't have much experience with that. So I'm kind of don't take this too seriously because I'm basically just rattling off what I've read from other people. Like almost, I basically learned a while ago that I like getting a strong and advanced validation signal, and I can get that with a sales process, whereas I can't get that with a marketing process. So I really like businesses, not so big that you're going through 3 months of budgets, but I like businesses that can just pay as customers. But with consumers, I'm doing some of it now. Like my current product is for consumers. I think you just charge anything, honestly, and then double or have it. If anyone else has like a more precise way to do it. But like, I think the big decision for most consumers, like most consumer products aren't so expensive that it's really a financial decision. In most cases, it's an emotional decision where it's like, does this price feel roughly right? Like how much should Netflix be worth given the number of hours you pay? Like compare the cost per hour of Netflix versus a video game or versus going to the cinema. Netflix is like the best deal in the universe. But if they tried to 5x their prices, there'd be riots in the street. Not because it's not worth that, but just because it's got this emotional anchor based on precedent. So I feel with consumers, you sort of put your finger in the air, like choose a price that feels right, and then like double or have it until like, you know, everybody or no one is paying you. And if anyone has ideas about how to be more optimal than that, I mean, you're very welcome. So, oh, one interesting thing I did here though, which is maybe just like a fun factoid, I don't know. In terms of cash flow, it's really attractive to do yearly deals. Like, oh, like pay me a year's money up front, you know, and I'll give you a 20% discount. But apparently that hugely reduces the value of your business to an acquirer because you've taken cash flow away from the person who's acquiring your business and you've made the revenue spiky. So apparently if you're thinking of packaging your business up for sale, you want to stick to just pure monthly pricing as much as possible. Because that'll give you a much bigger multiple and it offsets the cash flow. Whereas if you're struggling and you can't pay bills, you might want to pull the cash flow forward.
And one thing I'll add in terms of consumer, as you're evolving from customer discovery to customer development in terms of getting revenues, is in I would say more than half of my businesses were consumer facing businesses, and for everyone that we didn't charge up front, we never figured out a pricing model to make it profitable. It was the ones where we started. So with the opportunities where we gave it away for free because we needed traction or we needed feedback, they never worked out. For everyone where we were able to charge them day one, or we were willing to charge them day one, those businesses were more successful. So
yeah, that matches my expectation.
Move to pricing move to charging. Consider the model that never gives it away for free.
Yeah. Sometimes I was once asked to go and do like a business model innovation thing for the like traditional publishing industry, so like magazines, and we went in there and like they were so stuck with their current product and their current cost structure and business model and stuff that like they'd sort of asked to talk about, hey, let's think through business model innovation and stuff, but it turned out what they really wanted was a marketing trick to get people to pay for something they didn't want to pay for. And it's like, well, if you're not willing to like use idea selection and like choosing a business model and picking a customer, like if you're not willing to change the moving pieces of your business, like, like price kind of interlocks with those other factors. Like it needs to be a customer who's able to pay and value that they want to pay for and all of that stuff. So I see sometimes on indie hackers, people are like, hey, this is my product. Like, how do I charge people for it? And it's like, well, you can't charge for that type of product. You sort of backed yourself into a corner there. So, idea selection and pricing are pretty tightly coupled, and I'd agree. I'd say choose an idea that you think you'll be able to pay for rather than choosing an idea and then figuring out how to charge for it.
I'm gonna take an opportunity just to launch one more poll. Hang on. Just out of curiosity for those in a business, what was the reason that you started it? Was there a particular problem you were trying to solve? Was there a specific customer that you had access to or wanted to reach, or were you more focused on a technology or product bringing it to market? I think there was a comment earlier in the chat that on the web client, which I guess I didn't realize there was a Zoom web client, but that they couldn't see the polling. But I always thought I thought the Zoom always, even for the web, had a small downloadable component to it. But we'll look into that.
One other thought on consumer pricing, just while the poll does its thing, is there's like some important implications about how many bridges you have available to burn and how much of a limited resource the customers are. Like if your customer segment is like Fortune 500 executives, there's only 500 of them, so like you got to be really careful about burning any bridges. And if you go in with completely the wrong pricing, that can be very damaging to your business. Whereas if you're serving consumers or small businesses, they're essentially infinite in terms of their availability. And so it allows you to be a lot faster and looser with your pricing experiments. And again, grandfather people into the cheaper prices once you've given them. But I think it's a question where like trial and error is probably as optimal as like, it's like you have an infinite supply of them. So you don't need to worry too much about being wrong and losing a handful.
And 3/4 people here are trying to solve a problem. And, that I think that speaks to that comment, right? If we are solving a problem for someone, then that's worth something. And we should be, it should have a price. Rob, let me turn the tables a little bit. I know that there's some work that you've been doing and thinking about, some opportunity, some projects, there's some next projects for you. And can we answer questions for you? Are there, do you have insights that you would maybe want to gain from, a group of 40 entrepreneurs?
I mean, there's if anyone's working on a book, like a nonfiction book, I'd certainly be interested to hear about your experiences, but I'm not sure that that benefits from the group setting. But certainly, if you are wanting to write a book or you're working on it, shoot me an email or something. I'd love to chat about that one. But no, I mean, to me, I used to be so fascinated by, like, I spent so much time reading like business books and frameworks and like trying to learn everything about the process. And I think it eventually gets to a point of diminishing returns where you're basically like, okay, I basically know how to allocate my time. And then the stuff that interests me now is much more it's like the emotional questions or the life questions. It's like what sort of business is going to like enable the life that I'm going to be interested in leading, 5 years from now, for example, whatever that is, whether it's like more time with my dog in the mountains or like, who knows, whatever. And so again, I don't think it's really like the right thing for a group setting, unless other people just want to share their viewpoint on it. But the stuff about like, how do I pick the idea that will enable my life rather than slow it down? Because like in San Francisco, when I was there, everyone's career strategy, if you will, is first get rich, then decide what I want to do with my life. And I think in the bootstrapping community, there's a little bit more advanced awareness of how folks want to spend their time. And I'm always interested in like, oh yeah, I wanted to spend my time or live my life in this way. So like I built this business, which, enables that now instead of later. I think those stories are always very inspiring. But, in terms of problems, like, my business is profitable. It runs basically on autopilot. So it's like, that takes a lot of pressure off, it's like, I don't know, like it feels relatively comfortable at the moment.
Super. Thank you, Rob. So I'm gonna do a context switch here. We've used up more of, we've spotlighted Rob more than we typically would a call or a guest, but it seems like the conversation was certainly very rich and desired here. So we kind of let it go. So we're not going to do the typical bootstrappers conversations. But I do want to do, there's something when we used to run the tech meetup, there was we kind of gave the mic to anybody who wanted to share a 20 or 30-second announcement with everyone else, just to ask a question or make a request or share a tidbit of information. So I was thinking maybe we could do that here with there's still 40 of us left in the room. But before we do that, I want to thank Rob for your time, your insights, and for your being here and being part of our community. So
my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and thanks to everyone for the participation and everything. And if you have other questions, about your project or anything we didn't have time to cover, just shoot me an email at rob@robfitz.com or on Twitter, robfitz, and I will answer if I can and let you know what I think.
And I think Sean put your website in the chat, which will have links to your contact information as well. So
absolutely,
thank you, Sean.
Thank you,
Rob.
My phone number's on there too if you're feeling really aggressive.
Remembering that you're in Spain.
Rob's been to that Overcoming Painful Shyness seminar, I think.
You know what? But it's easier. Like one way to overcome my introversion was when I went to an event. Let me be the guy in the front of the room. So let me organize the event, right? Because that puts me out of the hard part is actually doing the networking out of the event and meeting all the people. But when you're in the front of the room, everyone comes to meet you. So there's way that us introverts can look extroverted and still reach the goals that we're trying to achieve, but yet do it in a way that works well for introverts.
Yeah, I used to go to meetings, and even though I wasn't the host, I would act like I was helping host and greet everybody who walked in the door and try to make them feel comfortable. And most of them seemed really appreciative because they were probably all introverts and afraid to say hi. So
exactly. So did anybody have any, we have a few minutes together left, any general announcements or shout outs you'd like to make?
For people who are introverted and have struggle, I find that if you just walk into an event, and I'm trying to learn how to do it via Zoom actually, if instead of trying to sell someone, you just are curious about them and their story, you can meet a lot of very interesting people.
Go in armed with questions, right? Be the one who's asking questions.
It has to be genuine. You have to be genuinely curious about them. them, not just fake it. But if you're genuinely a curious person, it makes it easy to meet others.
Yep. So that means you got to be a good listener as well. Listen to the answers after you ask the questions. Anyone else have anything to share?
Yes, Mike, once again, this is Shadidi Laser, and I'm launching season 3 of my talk show, which is Conversational Currency. We focus on the value and importance of social skills for business in a digital era, told through the lens of today's business and thought leaders. And I'm looking to share the stories of interesting and or successful startup founders. So if that is you, or if you know someone whose story needs to be told and amplified to bring some good to the world or insight, I would love to have a conversation with you and share your story on my platform.
Great. Thank you, Shadid. You're doing great work in Baltimore. It's been great to be associated with you. By the way, we also have Tim Jones here. Tim used to run the Minneapolis Bootstrappers Breakfast. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's correct. Some interesting. We won't get into a discussion on news, but some pretty intense stuff happening up in your neck of the woods.
Yeah. Bad news.
Anyone else have anything to share? Super. One of the so you know, we'll be done. One of the tips I got from someone's blog, I guess I should attribute it to them, is after a meeting like this, just to leave it open and let people just talk. They said that works better than you'd think. I can't imagine a scenario where that works really well, but here we are. I'm gonna go shift and copy all the information in the chat and get ready for what's next. But I do want to, you know, if you want to hang and chat, we'll leave the Zoom meet up for the Zoom meeting going for a few more minutes. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for coming back to the Bootstrappers Breakfast, for joining us for the first time, for coming in from all over the country and the world. And Rob, thank you for your participation. Thanks so much, everyone.